Welcome to Evolve to Succeed, the podcast that brings together entrepreneurs, founders, business leaders and experts to talk about their journeys and explore the link between personal and business success. I'm your host, Warren Munson, founder of Evolve, a coaching, training and development company focused on enabling business and personal success and creating a community of like-minded individuals. Whether that be through our peer groups, one-to-one coaching, our training and development programs for you and your teams, or through our content and events, our mission is to get the best out of each individual and inspire them to be better both in life and in business. If you want to learn more about Evolve, including our beautiful co-working space in Ashley Cross in Poole, then please go to evolvemembers.com, where you'll find great content, insights, details of all of our services, and also information on our forthcoming events. For now though, let's get on with the show. My guest this week is Tom Quay, founder of Passenger, a digital customer experience platform that supports more than 70 public transport operators and whose ultimate goal is to drive sustainability by re-engaging and revitalising perceptions around public transport and especially bus travel. Tom became an entrepreneur by accident and now has high ambitions about 15-minute cities and the future design of urban spaces. In today's podcast, he talks about the cultural shift required to ensure a healthier, happier planet and how you can become part of this journey and change. Welcome, Tom, to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Hi, Warren. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you on the podcast, and I'm really keen during the course of this conversation, we're going to talk about all things sustainable transport and how Passenger, your business, helps with all of those things. But I suppose we should put for our listeners some context around the conversation. So in 2008, you founded Base, which became a very successful agency, but you later went on to subsequently kind of pivot that business and focus purely on technology solutions for the public transport sector. And that is what became Passenger. So tell our listeners all about that and how that kind of journey came about.
Sure. I guess in 2008, I was a freelancer to start this whole thing off. I'd been freelancing for a couple of years in digital, doing all sorts of different projects for various companies, particularly around the South Coast. And Base became a sort of extension of that to some degree, and became a sort of I got more work on than I could cope with as a single freelancer. So we kind of started recruiting, and that became, I suppose, by accident at that point, the starts of an agency. And I don't think that was ever really my plan.
So you don't think you're ever destined? So do you not don't think you're really destined to run your own business? It wasn't something that was a burning desire. It was consequence of circumstance. Do you think?
I think it was exactly that. Yeah, I was doing something that I loved. I was building things for the web. This emerging technology. I'd studied animation, so computer animation at university. I'd actually gone to uni on the basis that I wanted to sort of work on Pixar movies. I had this massive desire to animate and do all of the sort of the rendering and the various kind of elements of what was sort of a really emerging art form at the time. And all the way through university, I was building websites for people. So rather than working in bars like my friends were, I was building sites. So I was earning a lot more money, doing a lot less sort of physical work. So I had this very old laptop that enabled me to work from home back in the day. And I just carried that on. One of my sort of final major projects was a content management system. So a system that allowed people to update their own websites for them, because I'd worked out that a database behind a website was quite a nice way for someone to manage their own content and an interface to that. So I fell out of university, and I'd seen how long people spent working on very short clips of animation. So there were these very beautiful 10-second clips of animation that had taken months and months and months to put together. And I just thought I could do a lot more quickly and get the satisfaction of building a site and launching it without all of that. And so that was the route that I went in the end, which is now I look back now and think how amazing would it have been to have gone and worked for Pixar and done all those things, but certainly no regrets, because those kind of days were my sort of founding experiences of what we have now. I moved into sort of selling that content management system as a product of the agency. And that is, to a huge extent, a lot of what we do now, but in a much more specialist way in public transport.
And it's really interesting, isn't it? Because that's kind of a story about destiny and hindsight and all of those kind of things. And perhaps using, for our listeners that perhaps still are at uni, are kind of are being inspired to go on a journey themselves. You clearly use that time at uni to kind of find yourself a bit more and what you truly wanted to do in life. And, an amazing kind of journey and story to get to the point where you launch base, you're hiring others in to deliver the work, you've got the content management system, but where did the pivot into public transport and delivering technology services for the public transport sector come from, Tom?
Well, largely by accident, would you believe? In 2008, we were approached by a very well-known company down here on the south coast called Yellow Buses, very sort of iconic in the town. They had, I think, one of the staff, one of the team in the marketing department had done a course at the Arts University, and that's where I was based as a freelancer in the Enterprise Pavilion, as it was known back then. So they came looking for someone who could help them to sell paper tickets on a website. So literally, buying a paper ticket through an e-commerce shop, and then it being sent out on in the post to be used on the buses. So we insane when you think about it now, but that was the starts of a very sort of fruitful relationship in exploring some agency work and some clever tech for a bus company. And a few years later, we were picked up by another bus company up in Nottingham, Nottingham City Transport, who had seen the work we'd done in Bournemouth and said, "Would you be interested in helping us do something similar?" And the seed of a product platform was starting to sort of emerge in a couple of the sort of agency projects that we were working on at the time.
But was there this kind of moment of truth where you decided, actually, this is great, we've got some great agency clients, the general business and agency is growing, but we've got this technology we're building here for a couple of the significant bus companies around the country, and we've got to focus on that? Because I'm just interested, because that takes a lot of confidence and faith and trust in making that decision, doesn't it?
It does, and it certainly wasn't a decision that we made overnight. I mean, I think when I look back, I think there was a huge process of working out what that transition might look like before we made that sort of decision to go all in on that move. I mean, we loved the work that we were doing as an agency, but I think as a team at the time, we felt that we weren't able to work on things for very long, and that is very much agency life. You are drafted in to do a 3-month, 4-month, if you're lucky, 12 months project, and then that's it. You're pretty much in and out. And I think the skills that we were learning at the time were quite complex, particularly in this public transport space. And we felt that actually, if we were to use those skills in a slightly different way, we could invest for the longer term and become more specialist and more niche in an area. And certainly from a business model perspective, we were looking at kind of the longevity of the agency model and the cycle of new business. It's never long before you could run out of work as an agency, and I think the pandemic has made that abundantly clear to many. And so, from a sort of business sustainability perspective, we were questioning whether that was a millstone that we wanted to put around our neck and grow a sort of traditional model agency.
But there is a big difference, isn't there? Because there's sometimes that in the early days, there is that confidence that a traditional agency is, business to business services. It's the same in professional services. It's income, isn't it? You open the doors, and I know the difference between Inspire and Evolve. Inspire, the day I started Inspire, I was billing clients. It's you're charging your time. It's income.
Yeah.
The Evolve, which is a product business, and you're actually investing in developing the product, investing in a team, you're investing in the IP, and you don't generate revenue immediately. And I suppose you had some legacy clients that you were working on, so you had that transition, but there still must have been that point where you thought, right, we're going to need to invest heavily now. If we're going to transcend from a service to a product business, this is a transition. And I suppose if there's anybody out there thinking of making that transition, have you got any tips or hints for them, or lessons that you learned and things you may have done differently?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think my advice would be to be as methodical as you can be, and think about that transition period. in terms of time frame. Can the model business that you have now sustain the transition period, the number of staff, the investment required, and be as brutal as you can be on that, and really make sure that whatever your estimates are in terms of time frame, double them, perhaps even triple them. It will take longer than you think to take something to market, because we're all inherently optimistic in what we're doing, and I think it's very easy to say, well, I think this whole business can turn around or change models very, very fast, but it will always take, I think, a bit longer, and I think you have to be very prudent in the decisions that you take. So if you're investing in the starts of a product platform or a technology product, what is the smallest amount of investment you can make to learn whether that that thing you are building is actually valuable to the market that you think you're going into. And we had two customers on the agency side that we had to talk to and say, look, we want to potentially move this into a license model. How do you feel about that? Because you're a really important part of this journey, and so that engagement type would change. And if this works well, you might become one of many. Whereas at the moment, you're two very important customers, and that's it's a really important conversation to have up front. And we did, and those two teams are largely in place still in one of those businesses. And I don't think we ever forget what they enabled for us in terms of allowing that relationship change to come to fruition, and to a large extent support us in that journey, and give us that opportunity to make something more sustainable for them as a business, i.e. a license style business rather than a custom application build agency model, but also the introductions to other companies like them and the networks that they were a part of. So we're incredibly grateful to those kind of early conversations and those early stakeholders in transitioning. So I think that's really important, is to make sure that not only on your business side, so all of the people in your business, but the people that will be using your product, you need those early supporters to make sure that that it's going to work, and that the thing you are building is going to be valuable to them.
Gaining engagement is it's a great piece of advice there, Tom, because a lot of product businesses, whatever the product, go kind of blindly into this kind of faith and this belief and this passion for what they do, and they build a product that they think is amazing, but maybe their customers don't need, or their customers need something different. So a great piece of advice there. So to bring our listeners up to date, where is Passenger now? What is its technology? What solutions does it provide? And how does it make transport more sustainable, Tom?
So from those early days of two bus companies, one in Bournemouth, one in Nottingham, we are now, our software platform is now supporting in the region of 70 operators, with more coming on board all of the time. In terms of what that product provides them, it's a digital customer experience platform, as we like to call it these days. It allows them to sell to retail ticket products to customers through apps and websites. And it also allows them to manage network information and disruption information, and feed that out through again the mobile apps and the websites to the users of those buses and those trams. So should a bus be cancelled for any reason or be ahead of its schedule, they can communicate through very simple to use administration tools to actually tell people that they need to catch those services, what's really happening, and help them to adjust their journey plans on that basis.
So that product has completely changed and evolved, and I suppose is developing all the time as technology moves on, Tom.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a SaaS, so a software as a service based model. We have a sort of a continuous investment in that platform. We've just launched some discount campaign tools to allow our operator customer base to sort of re-engage people after the pandemic. So as an e-commerce platform, they now have the opportunity to create sort of new user incentivized campaigns to get people, both old and new sort of customer base, back to using sustainable transport again after being sort of in lockdown and either working from home or cooped up or whatever it may be. But providing those tools to sort of re-engage and grow patronage back to where it was. Because I think we're about 75% now of what we were sort of pre-pandemic in terms of numbers using the buses and the trams.
Fantastic. And out of all of this, it's clear from looking at your background and posts and things that you've said in sort of in the public arena, is you're personally really passionate about sustainable transport. So I want to talk about that. So I suppose my first question for you, Tom, is how do you really define sustainable transport?
I think the simple answer to that one is anything that's not your own car.
Okay.
So if you're taking a lift from someone, if you are or they would call car sharing in the industry, if you're riding a scooter, whether it's electric or not, whether you are riding a bike, a bus, obviously, a tram, a train, anything that is not jumping into your own vehicle, which is usually yourself on your own, and some empty seats around you, and sitting in what is increasingly, a very congested network of roads. And I think, the car is an amazing invention. It really is quite an incredible thing. But I think we've got to the point where we have had too much of a good thing, and we're not getting around like we used to. We're not able to move. That I don't know if you've seen the wonderful billboards that are sort of posted around some places that say you are not sitting in traffic, you are the traffic. And I think it's this understanding that we very much have to take a personal responsibility for the change that is going on around us. This thing that we are seeing every single day on the news, whether it be wildfires or glaciers melting or whatever the impact might be. We have an effect on that. And I think in England or in the UK, certainly, we're not seeing the direct, the really catastrophic impact of that. So I think there is a degree of cognitive dissonance about the whole thing. It's not really happening. Perhaps it's something
it's
that
not
I see
our
on the
problem
telly.
type thing.
It's not our problem, exactly. And I think it's one of those that if we are to solve these things, we have to look at how we move around ourselves and how we our own personal responsibility within that. So really, can you take a journey that doesn't involve picking up the keys and jumping in the car, like you always have? That's the question.
So where do you sit then in that? Because that's a great definition of sustainable transport. Well, where do you sit with electric cars then? Because in some ways that is deemed to be sustainable, but that is isolated transport. Again, you sitting in a car with 3 or 4 empty seats around you. To you, that's not a definition of sustainable.
There are a lot of really good experts on electric vehicles, and I don't profess to be one of them. But I think the problem still remains that the traffic problem, the congestion issue isn't solved by changing the engine type. We have a much lower impact in EV, so that is part of the solution. But in the general concepts of reusing and recycling, this is about refusing. So don't take that journey, or if you're going to take it in a way that has less impact. So the number of vehicles doesn't change when that engine is an electric vehicle. So it can't be the only solution.
Okay, and that's what I really get about that definition of sustainable transport you've given. It's not all about the environment. The environmental part is a huge part, but it is about the congestion, the economic effect of congestion on our roads, and making transport therefore more sustainable.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think when it comes down to brass tacks, the nation is measured in GDP. And if we are hindered in our ability to move goods, people, things around, then we're going to be reducing our collective output, or that's how we're being measured. So we need to attempt to reduce that if we can. And I think the bus, I mean, it's a well trotted out message by the bus industry for sure, but a double-decker bus can take 75 cars off the road because of the number of seats on it. And I fully appreciate that post-pandemic there's going to be potentially a little bit more apprehension about going and sharing space with other individuals, but there have been no cases of outbreaks kind of traced back to public transport. So I think when you look at the science over your kind of emotional reaction, there's plenty of evidence to say that it is very, very safe. It has been all the way through the pandemic. And actually, we can't afford to wait too long to make those life choice changes that are going to help and save, I suppose, to a large extent, the future generations. And as a parent, I'm very focused on, I suppose, playing my part in making sure that there's something for them to enjoy.
Definitely. I was going to have a conversation with you around the insights from lockdown, really, and about the way people perhaps will now use and view public transport going forward. And one of the statistics I was interested in was how use is returning. And you're saying it's sort of back to sort of 75% use. But do you think there is some consequences because of COVID and the pandemic and lockdown on people, the way in which people will view and use public transport going forward?
Yeah, I think there's a very natural hesitance to share space with anyone post-pandemic. I think certainly if you spent a lot of time in isolation or in lockdown, then I think just getting back to the office or to your place of work, there's a natural sort of reluctance potentially to do that. And obviously it's going to be very different for different individuals. So I think if you're not familiar with catching a bus, then perhaps now is not the easiest time to do something like that. But yeah, it's one of those that if you could perhaps catch a shared bike, so perhaps a sort of a Next bike or a Beryl bike or a scooter instead of the car, that's something that you don't have that issue with potentially as much.
One of the things we have seen as a result of COVID and the pandemic in lots of sectors is the acceleration of sort of digital transformation. Have you seen that in the public transport sector?
Yeah, absolutely. Without a doubt, it has been exactly as you described. People have been encouraged not to pay on the buses with cash and to move to either contactless payment or mobile tickets in the way that our technology enables. So it's certainly been an accelerator of systems like ours in terms of adoption and moving away from what I think was already happening, but just accelerated, through the pandemic and that desire to move to contactless methods of payment. So I think it was, as I say, it was definitely happening. It's something that has sped things up, and I think that will naturally have a really positive impact on the networks. And ultimately, reasons for perhaps not catching a bus are that they perhaps take slightly longer than the same journey in your own car. But I think with things like digital payment methods, they certainly speed up that boarding time. So if you imagine every bus not spending as long at each bus stop because there isn't a handful of coins being put on the or handed to the driver, and a QR code on a mobile app is being scanned within a second, or a contactless payment card is being read within the same time frame, that those 3 or 4 people at each stop are boarding very, very, very quickly in comparison to where they were before. So the pandemic has had a positive influence on how people access the transport and therefore the speed of those journeys overall.
And I suppose more people that access the technology from a customer's perspective and a customer experience perspective get to understand the ease of it, and probably that enhanced customer experience of knowing my bus is coming, my train is coming, and having up-to-date information, I suppose, changes that perception of the old-fashioned bus journey when you're standing in the rain waiting for the bus.
Yeah, well, that's what we hope, and that's certainly our mission as a business is to revitalise that sort of out of date image of bus travel. I mean, we often refer to the bus as the humble bus because it's got almost a bad reputation in terms of what it can deliver to your life. But I think the reality is very different in geographies that we work all around the UK. That it is a lifeline. It provides connectivity to education, to work, to leisure. Where people can't drive or don't choose to drive or can't, because of the infrastructure there. So it really is an enabler to a lot of communities, and certainly, the tech being as people would expect it to be in 2021, efficient, working well, good user experience is an enabler to that. So if the pandemic has moved the operators into adopting this technology more quickly, then that's a great thing.
I suppose coming off the back of that, I was just interested on the impact on passenger. Clearly, there's been a bigger uptake, so that's given a growth opportunity. But is there a challenge now for passenger as a business that, your roadmap for your technology and your development is possibly being accelerated because you've had this kind of uptake and adoption of the technology, and now the bus companies and the customer want more? Does it present any challenges for you, Tom?
I think when you are building products, everyone wants everything every feature
Yesterday.
very quickly. Yesterday. I mean, it's very much, you know, our daily bread is trying to work out what the most valuable thing is to build next. So we will. I don't think we will ever build everything that every individual customer wants. But we do, you know, engage really heavily on those conversations, and part of our kind of our mantra is to make sure that, you know, we're building the right things for our customers, and we continue to do that, but also looking at what end users want. So we're a, you know, B2C to C business. So we are B2B to C, and we have end users as well as administrative users and you know, the businesses that buy our software. So yeah, there's a lot of stakeholders in all of that, and there's a lot of demands in terms of where we spend our time. And you know, the reality is that we're not someone like Google. We're a team of 30, and we, you know, our apps are the same size icon on a phone as all those, you know, those other apps that are being developed by, you know, Facebook and, you know, tens of thousands of developers and designers and all the rest of it. So the expectations are just as high, and we will do our level best to grow that business at the speed that, you know, enables those kinds of changes. Yeah.
In the tech sector, and particularly in fast-moving sectors, disruption is a word that's thrown around quite a lot these days. So do you feel like Passenger is a disruptor? And if so, I mean, and what would you describe as a technology business that is a disruptor?
Well, it's an interesting idea. Disruption in public transport isn't a good thing. So I like everything to run very, very smoothly. To your question, I think disruption is it's a really interesting idea. I mean, I think you can attribute a lot of sort of very radical innovation. I think autonomy is probably very disruptive in this space. But I think the disruptive stuff is probably the super complex stuff. I mean, you know, if we're looking at autonomous vehicles, you know, they were due 2013, I think. You know, when Google kind of first sort of started to say when these sorts of things would be on our roads and driving us around, you know, we're nowhere near that. So I think disruption in mobility is going to take a long time, not because of the technology necessarily, but, you know, because of the politics and the cultural change that needs to happen. You know, we've had decades of you know, of car dominance, if you like, and culture has grown up around that. You know, we as individuals, you know, I certainly, when I got to 17, could not wait to take a driving test. You know, it was a natural part of growing up for me. And I think, you know, the shift will take time to sort of undo all of that. So I think there will be a very slow period of change to sort of to turn this whole thing around. So but it is disruption. It is fundamental disruption. Mobility is such a core part of our daily lives. You know, getting around safely, getting around within a time frame that we are happy with. All of those things are really important. So yeah, it's fundamental disruption, but it doesn't necessarily feel disruptive when it's happening at a very, very slow pace.
But as you say, the disruption is kind of in the technology that is going to be on the roads. Your offer is a core offer where you are helping that customer experience, whatever. At the moment, it's in the bus sector, and I'm sure it will stay that way, but wherever that sector may be. But that is kind of interesting to just think about in terms of sustainable transport. I don't know what your views on this, and, you know, let's get it away from the local kind of area and just talk about the provinces. Because when we all go to a city, we all jump on public transport, don't we? It's just what we do. But when you're out in the provinces, and it's that, you know, you used the phrase, it's that convenience factor type thing. It's that ability just to get and complete a journey. It isn't so easy using public transport in the provinces. So what do you think, you know, if you had your magic wand, if you were the Minister for Transport, what would you do to enable better adoption of public transport in the kind of provinces? I've elated you there, promoted you quite heavily, haven't I, there, to a government minister. But you know, what thoughts would you have, and what can be done? Because that is a challenge, isn't it? Is that convenience factor possibly isn't there?
It's a very real challenge. Yeah, no, it's a very real challenge. I think the reality is that the economics of public transport or shared transport in the provinces doesn't really stack up. So it needs some sort of government, local authority intervention. Yeah, these things are private businesses. It's buses in particular were deregulated many years ago. So outside of TfL in London, the market is a free market. So the idea of public transport, I think a lot of people believe that it's council run, but it's certainly not. So these are private businesses that are they need to make money in order to pay their staff, their drivers, their head offices, and run their businesses. A lot of them will have shareholders, and in the same way they need to return a profit. So the good ones are the ones that understand that sort of running really strong networks involve having lots of core routes within urban areas, but having lots of feeder routes that feed that core network. And those are the ones that bring, sort of reach out to the provinces and enable travel into urban areas from some further out places. So, I mean, it really does depend on the operator's kind of vision and ability in terms of, of how far out they want to reach to bring that in. But it's certainly a problem, certainly a challenge, should I say, to solve in terms of, the economics of rural transport in particular. There is something which you may have come across around DRT, so responsive transport. In sort of, it's almost a hybrid of a taxi sort of bus model that is being heavily sort of trialed in various regions, just to see whether this hybrid idea can start to feed some of the kind of core networks in the urban areas. And that's in terms of mobility innovation at the moment, that's kind of the hot topic, and that's where a lot of venture capital and funds are going to see whether that kind of stuff works. If you've come across Uber Pool, for example, that's a very similar kind of approach where trying to make journeys viable by putting more than one person or one passenger in a vehicle, but without it becoming a fixed network, classic humble bus. We will see. The Department for Transport is very keen on this idea at the moment, and we will see over the coming years whether it plays out that it actually it can be a sustainable model. I suspect if it is placed well and indeed does feed the core networks of urban areas, then it may well work out. But there have been, unfortunately, plenty of examples of it not working out so far. So it is the jury is certainly out.
But it's interesting to see that you say VCs and PE houses are approaching that kind of end of the market, because usually they're quite quick to predict the future, aren't they, and get on early and see where the opportunity exists. But I suppose the challenge is with sustainable transport, it is a collaborative approach, isn't it? On one end, you've got us, the consumer. You've then got the local authorities that have a kind of, they've got aims and objectives. And then you've got, like you say, the private transport companies that have got to fulfill the ambitions of the local authorities and us as the consumer.
Absolutely.
I think model, isn't it?
I think that's the point, that there are so many stakeholders in the mix, and there is certainly an element of political will needed in certain areas. And I think for the bigger organisations that have funding, often their technology is deployed in one country and it works very well. And I think to take that to a different territory, a different country, and try and roll it out, there are often political or different challenges that don't necessarily facilitate that technology to be rolled out in the same way. So I think it's to categorize all private equity and VCs in the same there are lots of different ones, obviously. And I think we've only got to look at Uber, for example, as a great example of a company that's changed dramatically in what it's doing. Originally it was all going to be, let's not worry about the drivers, it'll all be autonomous, and that's where we'll get our cost savings. And they don't have any autonomous elements to their business at the moment. That's all been sold off. So what seems like a surefire bet, when it's pitched, isn't always, I think, is the point. So I think in mobility there is an awful lot of work to be done, and lots of future that is yet to be decided, however glossy the pictures and the visions are laid out.
Is there any kind of particular cities or countries that you look at around the world and you think, given the environment we've got, given the technology that is available, that you think are getting it right in terms of sustainable transport and getting that mobility piece sort of buttoned down and giving people the connectivity and mobility they want while being sustainable?
There are some great examples around the world. I mean, I particularly love what's happening in Paris at the moment under the mayor, Anne Hidalgo. I think the brave political decisions to remove vehicle traffic, or a large quantity of vehicle traffic, from the Champs-Élysées, for example, and really reclaim some of the city for the people of the city, and get rid of this background hum of traffic and this pollution that's just driving down those roads. I think these are not popular decisions necessarily, but they are very brave and incredibly sort of empowering and powerful for the future. And just to see some of the artwork of these visions being kind of put out on social media in some of these white papers, and tree-lined streets that have been dramatically pedestrianized and being reclaimed by cafes and people sitting out and enjoying time together. I think it's great. I think a lot of what we need as a society is our politicians to be brave and not think necessarily about the votes and the things that they that keep them re-elected, but to kind of put the things into place that in 5-10 years time we're going to think, well, why didn't we do this before? But it's a challenge because there is always a very vocal minority that don't want these things to happen or don't want these things to change. They want the freedom to drive down any road they please, and it's not easy, but it's certainly, I think, great when you see some of the biggest cities in the world leading by example and putting out these really clear vision statements. I mean, there's a lovely concept around a 15-minute city. So this kind of 15-minute walk from where you live, you can access every service that you need. So you don't necessarily need to drive to work, or you don't need to sort of catch a vehicle somewhere far away, because everything you need is very close by. And a lot of this comes back to urban planning, and and something that I'm very fascinated by, but have no qualifications in whatsoever. Is this kind of idea of how we design our urban spaces and how we build them for how we want to live in 10, 20, 30, 40 years time. And I think when you look around and you listen, or you certainly locally in Bournemouth, you hear traffic, you see traffic, and actually when you're sitting outside a cafe or a restaurant, you don't want to hear all of that stuff. So if you could arrive there by a push bike or an e-scooter or a bus that conveniently drops you, a nice electric quiet bus that drops you in the proximity of that really lovely small high street that is not too far from your house, so all locally sourced type shops, then that's the future that I think a lot of people can get behind. But it does require us to not think about driving that 2-minute journey to park outside the shop that we want to sit and enjoy. So that's the trade-off.
We've kind of got to take self-responsibility, haven't we? But we do need our politicians to be visionaries, as you say, because it comes back to us changing and our children changing, and it's generational, isn't it? And perhaps just as a country in the UK, we're a little bit too short-termism. If it isn't going to change my world tomorrow, then I'm not going to do it, or I'm not going to vote for it, or I'm not going to invest in it. And to make sustainable transport work, we've got to change our mindset, haven't we? And we've got to be passionate about doing that.
I think that's absolutely it. I think with all of the tech that I see coming out, things like Deliveroo and Just Eat, it's all about convenience and how can the consumer save a few minutes not going to pick up food, or have something brought to me, or and I actually think there's a really interesting kind of anti convenience idea that needs to become mainstream. Actually public transport is going to be a little bit more inconvenient for me, but that's okay, because it's a good thing for everyone. I need to have less personal convenience, because then I secure the future of my children and the resources that we have. So it's this kind of shared responsibility thing. It's not about me in the moment. I can get off my backside and go and ride my bike to pick up that thing, rather than have the micra, the car drive drive the pizza to my house. So it's a bit of a huge culture shift, I think, that's required. But if anyone listening, what's the one thing that you could do, to perhaps not take a journey that, you could walk or catch a bus, then that's a contribution, isn't it? And I think it doesn't take a lot to make a small change. And I think that's the thing I would encourage, is to try and think about, a small change that you could make that might not feel like it's having a great impact in the moment, but will collectively contribute.
And it's that one step at a time approach. And that probably comes down to one of the biggest challenges regarding sustainable transport. And I think we've touched on it a couple of times, is actually ditching your car for public transport or getting on a bike is about changing habit and mindset, isn't it, for those journeys? And people are used to just picking up their car keys and getting into the car and going where they need to do. So, and I know you're very passionate about cycling as a mode of transport and something you do. So, any kind of hints, tips about altering mindset? Anything insights that you would give from your own personal experiences?
It does take time. And I think it's slow changes. So I think that I heard a lovely thing last year. A chap called Dr. Ian Walker sort of mentioned a concept where it's you intend to make a change, so you make very conscious decisions about the change that you're going to make. So that example you give about picking up your keys, because they're in the same place, and you're going to get in your car, move your keys, and think about what you need to perhaps take your bike and move things into position in your home, that perhaps your helmet, you've got a helmet, maybe put it in the kitchen, so that if you choose to wear a helmet or not, or and your lock for your bike. I mean, these are the sorts of things that I've spent a long time conditioning myself to do, that I now have a sort of a D-lock hanging up on the coat hook in my hallway, and that's very visible to me, so that I know I could pick that up and go out. I actually go out the back door far more often than I go out the front door now, because I'm not going to my driveway, I'm going to my shed. So it's those kinds of things that are, they take time. But I think if you are really committed to making or breaking those really long established habits, then those are the sorts of things that you can do to change those long learned behaviours that
well, they're ingrained in us, aren't we? Like we say, we're ingrained.
Yeah, they're ingrained. I mean, this is it. Yeah.
They're Absolutely. Ingrained that at 17 you learn to drive, you get yourself a car, and off you go. It's which you mentioned earlier. So it's changing those ingrained behaviours. But again, some great insight there. And it's a bit like, don't they say, if you want to get up early and exercise, then lay your kit out the night before, because you're not putting it, you get up and you put your kit on and you go. I like that same kind of concept with thinking about transport use and all of those kind of things.
That is a lovely way to think about sustainable transport as well. If you can weave journeys into your exercise, then why wouldn't you? If you are fortunate enough to have a shower at work, for example, walking that journey or running that journey is a really valid way to travel. Your feet are a very valuable mode.
And you are passionate about cycling, so I mean, what changes and positive changes would you like to see happen to promote cycling? Again, this is probably an issue for the provinces as well, isn't it? And actually, locally, we're seeing more cycle routes and those sort of things go in. But what can local governments, authorities do? What can be done to promote cycling further, do you think?
I think it all comes down to safety. I think as a parent that is not too far away from sending my son off to secondary school, I think it really does. Can we travel safely on a bike in the traffic? And so a lot of it comes down to the infrastructure. And this is where I suppose my interest in urban planning becomes very important, because if I'm going to push the sustainable transport message, the infrastructure has to be there, and therefore the understanding of what is safe and what is not has to be there. And I think I'm certainly sort of engaged with my local council and to try and understand what they are doing, and to feed back on some of the schemes that they are looking at or working on. We're lucky enough down here in Bournemouth that we have some very significant routes going in, so some very wide cycle paths that are going to be incredibly safe. And I think it's really on on residents that are kind of engaged in this stuff to talk about it and sort of share that with others and be visible in kind of using it. To a large extent, it's our responsibility as residents to engage with our councils and to let them know that the work they're doing is wanted, it's needed, and to also feedback on the gaps in the network that are still there. So the infrastructure is improving all the time. There is a mandate from central government. There is money available to regional authorities to change the way that our infrastructure is already laid out. That will take years. That will take huge sums of money to change it, so that the car is not the dominant mode. But we are already seeing some really smart roundabouts coming in where the priorities are changing. Some very well thought through cycle lanes that are giving priority to the cyclists, so that they're not stopping at every junction, for example, so the journey is not incredibly painful from a stop-start perspective. And so that is coming, but it is really to a large extent, if we can fit it into our already busy lives, to engage with those officers working at the councils, doing this, implementing these schemes, to let them know what we think and that we want more of it. So that's certainly, in the time that I get, I'm riding down the cycle lanes, when they're being finished, and I'm trying to, sort of have a look at what state they're in and where the gaps are in it, what comes next, really. I think certainly I referred earlier to, my son heading off to secondary school next year. And I really want him to be able to ride to school. But obviously I'm assessing that route or those routes to school from a safety perspective and making sure that he can do that autonomously, and without fear of being knocked over, because that's why, as parents, we don't allow our children to ride out on the roads, because the traffic is insane and it's just not worth the risk.
Yeah. And that insanity brings conflict, doesn't it, with drivers and other users of the roads?
Yeah.
And it's how do you do it safely? I absolutely agree with that. So just spinning back round to your business, to Passenger, what are your hopes and aspirations for Passenger, as we start to wrap up the conversation, for the next 5 to 10 years? Where do you think Passenger will be, and what are your hopes and aspirations, Tom?
That's a great question. I for a long time, I wasn't ever looking further than about 3 months ahead.
Yeah.
And I increasingly, as the business grows, we start to spend time looking at where we want to take things and where we see things going. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, there is so much opportunity in mobility, and I think so much that is unwritten. I would love us to become the de facto platform, if you like, in the UK for these operators to deliver great tech, to great customer experience to their customers. I would love it if everyone in the UK knew how to catch a bus, and knew that it was easy, and that you just do X, Y, Z, and it will tell you how much it's going to cost and when it's going to be there, and all of those things. And then I think, to some degree, we have succeeded as a business. We have made it easy for everyone to make a responsible mobility choice. At the moment, it's too hard. People get in their cars because it is easy. They've already paid for it. They've already got the fuel in it. The keys are there. It's on the driveway. There isn't much thinking required. So, a huge amount of the work we are doing is about boiling down all of the complexity of data sets and formats and scheduling and real-time systems and all of the things that we deal with into a very, very easy to use system that people can trust. Whether that's going through an operator's app or an app that has lots of operators in it, or whatever it might be. Our mission is to make sure that it's really simple, and that people are not afraid of taking that sustainable journey when they make that decision to do it, because it's nice and easy to do it.
I was going to ask you what your definition of success was, but I think we might have just wrapped it up in that response. But I suppose we could just ask, is the Evolve to Succeed podcast? I do tend to finish with this question. So from a personal point of view, if you take yourself out of the business, what does success mean to you, Tom?
I think a lot of what we're dealing with at the moment is growth. We the first few years of Passenger were about, do we have a product that that fits the market. We know we do. We have a huge amount of people using it every day. It's highly respected. People like using it, and people use it all the time. The challenge we have now is scaling that and making sure that everything that you have as a business in the early days, all of those values as a small team that you hold dear, all of that purpose that you kind of try and infuse everything you do with, we maintain that. So success for me is really about making sure that regardless of who is the director and who is leading it, that stays core to the business, and that's something that we're really keen to make a fundamental part of the business, whether 5, 10, 20 years it's having a lasting impact. And I describe it as a bit of a legacy, not trying to big it up too much, but just be beyond people. If we can make sure that this business continues to thrive and behave in a way that we have done in the early years, then I'll be very happy indeed.
Fantastic. I often talk about business needing focus, passion, and belief, Tom, and it's clear through our conversation today and everything you've shared with us, me and the listeners, is that you've got that in kind of spades, and that focus, passion, and belief is there for what you do and why you do it. So thank you for being a great guest on the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Thanks, Warren. It's been a pleasure being on.
Thank you for listening to the Evolve to Succeed podcast. My hope with every episode is that you've learned something new or heard something that challenged your way of thinking and further motivated you on your path towards becoming a more knowledgeable, informed, and inspired individual and business leader. If you enjoyed this episode, then please help us by rating, reviewing, and subscribing. We really value your feedback and would love to have you along for future episodes. And please don't forget to learn more about Evolve by going to evolvemembers.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.